Good morning. So it's been a bit. I've been busy with training and not feeling well. So it's been a couple weeks, but stuff in the news, stuff that needs to be addressed. Not necessarily by me, but I'm going to address it. And oh boy. So this shooting in Texas. So first off, it's gut-wrenching on a number of levels. Not that, any one mass casualty event like this is necessarily worse than another, and kind of become sadly numb to it in a way as a society, just because it keeps happening. But yeah, tragic to be sure. And then made all the more worse, at least, for me, not that it really matters how I experience this, but just with the frustration and, sense of just weariness and defeat I have with the way that it was handled. And the agencies apparently come out and said, we effed up or something to that effect, for all that's worth. And I was seeing something just this morning that I guess the chief at that agency is now like on the city council, and there's some like weird inside baseball going on with it. It was just disgusting. But I don't know. I'm not there. I don't know what's going on with that. It sounds weird. But yeah, frustrating to no end. Especially given just how, number one, perceptions being what they are of law enforcement, and like how much work is done trying to, repair, I guess, law enforcement's image nationally, and highlight the good work that's done so often, and all the good and heartwarming and noble stories just get instantly drowned out and disappear in light of just some horrendous decision making. And you guys, you had one job, and that was kind of my immediate knee-jerk reaction to the whole thing. You had one job, right? And I've heard it voiced by other people in the law enforcement community. Well, this is a result of cops being second-guessed and browbeat, and damned if you do, damned if you don't. And I feel that to an extent, but I don't see really how that applies in this scenario. I don't think that there's anybody that's going to have heartburn with the cops coming in and taking care of business. This is, the one time where society is going to be rather unanimous on what needs to happen. This person needs to get dealt with. And the fact that it did not happen for an extended period of time is just maddening. What did you guys sign up to do? Again, I work there. I don't know any of those guys. I'm not privy to any of the inside whatever that was going on. But frankly, it shouldn't matter. And ultimately it was, a few guys from BORTAC, the Border Patrol tactical unit, that just, I guess, happened to be in the area, and also frustrated with the slowness with which the situation was being dealt with, and went in and took care of it. And that, I think that gets lost sight of as well, because it feels like, to extent, the extreme elements of the left and the right have kind of converged on law enforcement doesn't actually serve a function. They're not here to protect you, and we are better off without them, and this is held up as case in point, right? Never mind, like, who was it that actually went in and dealt with it ultimately? Well, it wasn't the local guys, it was the feds. And to be sure, the local guys were standing in the way of armed citizens who, wanted to go and deal with the situation. And I understand why maybe you don't want to introduce that variable into a volatile situation. But again, there's no way to slice this where this works out well for anybody, especially the children inside. I mean, just wow. I mean, and what else can you say about that? So yeah, it just incredibly frustrating, like I said, and disheartening to see again all the good, all the hard work be undone by just something so flagrantly not, how things are done anymore. There was a couple years ago, and I don't know if was it in Texas or was it another school shooting, and there was like a school resource officer or some old retired on duty guy who futzed around outside of school while it was being shot up until other people could show up and deal with the problem. And you would think, given all the shade that was thrown that guy's way, that there would be nowhere left in the country where that would be the response to a school shooting. But apparently not. So anyway, I'm not going to ramble on about that anymore, but that's in the news. And of course there's been all sorts of big brain takes about firearms, generally speaking, following that. It especially coming from our commander-in-chief, who wants to assert things like you couldn't own cannons, and that the Second Amendment, you were never able to own weapons of war, and like just blatant and easily falsifiable nonsense. If anybody would care to take a look, but of course, people who are apt to listen to what people like Joe Biden have to say about firearms will just take what he says at face value. And of course, there's all sorts of, we just want common sense regulation. We don't want to get rid of guns, and that whole line, which it doesn't hold up. Freedom Tunes did actually a pretty good takedown of that, and I think they've addressed it, and other people have as well, but maybe I'll link it in the description because they'll do better justice to it than I will. But I mean, suffice to say, there's not really a great argument to show that doing away with guns is going to cause any meaningful impact on whether or not these things occur or not anymore. And the only thing it will clearly accomplish is disarming law-abiding citizens who are no danger to anybody but someone who would mean them harm. And it bears remembering just how quickly we forget things like the massacre in Waukesha, I think it was, where the guy ran over 62 people with a truck at a parade. Now, only 6 of them died, somehow, miraculously. But there are other forms of mass casualty events which are perpetrated around the world without the use of firearms. And if you take firearms out of the equation, it does not preclude things like this from occurring. I mean, if you've ever driven by an elementary school in the morning, without putting ideas in people's heads, just like someone whose mind works like the Waukesha guy might see a target-rich environment and no firearms required. As horrific as that is to contemplate, but that is the reality of the world we live in. Is these things do happen, and if you take a firearm out of the equation, it can be just as deadly. And you end up with weird stories like there was some, terror attack in London, and like the guy who was perpetrating the attack was engaged by a citizen with like a narwhal tusk. I'll see if I can find the story. But that's what people are kind of like left with, right? Is some sort of like improvised weapon to try and defend themselves from, acts of terrorism, which is just plainly absurd, right? And I think the way we think about these incidents, we need to kind of reevaluate, because you don't really see them, at least in other places, to the degree that we have them here. And again, it's not to say that it is impossible. I mean, trucks exist all over the world, okay? So why is it a thing here? Now, I mean, certainly people would want to argue about the ease of perpetrating something like that with a firearm, and you can engage in that debate whether it is easier or not to just hit the accelerator into a crowd of people. But I think there's a cultural element to it here, and there's kind of a copycat mystique going all the way back to Columbine, and that massacre that has really somehow taken root in the popular consciousness, and I think it's worth asking, like, why is that, right? What is it about our culture, and about the disaffected and isolated young men in our society who perpetrate these crimes, that they want to lash out at the young and the innocent, helpless, in such a just nihilistic and self-destructive way, socially speaking. I mean, obviously they're not just destroying themselves, and I'm not trying to empathize with people who do those things. I mean, they're awful, evil, heinous acts, and that is undeniable. But it's certainly some sort of understanding of the underlying psychology of the event, and why it appeals to that sort of person, I mean, needs to be more seriously examined than we're doing it now. So often you hear that this person was on the radar of the FBI, or you look at the photo of that sort of person, and you're like, well, yeah, that figures. Not always, but there's something that's getting missed along the way, and the way we interdict these kinds of people before they act needs to change, which is not easy. I'm not going to pretend it is, but I mean, you'd think with as again horrific as these events are, that we could put more effort into deterring and preventing them in the first place, and understanding again why this thing in particular. I mean, there's lots of things or people that could be lashed out at. I mean, and again, I'm not suggesting targets, but I mean, certainly small school children have to be low on the list of people who are directly responsible for whatever effed up thing happened in your life. And I chuckle because it's easier than crying. But yeah, I mean, who else could you be doing these things to? And again, I'm not suggesting a target. I'm just saying there's again something about the psychology of these events that I feel like we're missing. And I recognize it's not easy to identify. For example, I had received a call while I was working from local FBI field office and like, hey, we got this passed along from the social media company. These threats were made about this school, and we want you to go kind of, try and locate this person, and see if you can identify who made the post, that sort of thing, do a threat assessment, which I ended up doing, and of course the FBI was able to very quickly obtain subscriber info on the ISP that this post was made from, and it wasn't too difficult to lock down where it came from and find the young high school age teenage male who had made the post, and go do a threat assessment and an interview. And of course, parents are horrified to hear that their son is making those sorts of threats, about their school, their classmates. And I mean, it's surreal to go and interview a kid like this, and what's going on in your head, that you thought this was a good idea. Like, what were you trying to accomplish? And ultimately, in this case, I think he was dumb and thought he was being funny, and clearly was not. Who knows, right? And that's the real shitty thing about a situation like that, right? And you hear those stories, well, this, person was on the radar. It's like, okay, well, they made this threat, right? And I go and investigate it, and document it, and pass that along to, the juvenile department to take some kind of action. And then that person was charged with a crime, and we did what we could to try to, create a safety plan, and mitigate any risk, alert the school administration. Parents gave us consent to search the whole house for any, weapons, and he didn't, have any known access to any weapons, denied having any weapons, found none in his room. But, ultimately, all you can really do is kind of interview this kid and, like I said, try to understand, what's your thought process, and, like, is this something you're, cry for help, or, just, again, you think you're being funny and you're just being dumb, or, like, is there something more here? And you're trying to interrogate, and I mean, not in the adversarial sense, but like, tease information out of an immature mind, which is not well developed, poorly educated, and, minimally articulate, about what your thoughts and motivations are on the subject, and I mean, he basically said his friends were like, oh, well, that wasn't very smart, and you're going to end up on a FBI watch list. Like, well, yeah, you are. And he's probably still on an FBI watch list. And like I said, I mean, my understanding was that the juvenile department charged him with a crime. And making that kind of terroristic threat is not okay. But, I mean, that doesn't really do much to limit his freedom, right? And ultimately, if he gets it into his mind to go carry out some kind of attack at some later date, like, somebody would back and like, well, why didn't you do more about it? It's a valid question, but, ultimately, I mean, people still have rights and liberty, even children, and there is only so much that can be done. And of course, if something awful happens, none of that nuance is going to be captured, right? Nobody's going to know or care, the legwork that was done. All they're going to hear is, well, this person was known to the FBI, right? And, why wasn't something done? And again, not an unreasonable question. By all means, like, you feel like more should be done, but, document, like I said, put together some sort of safety plan, hopefully get him into some kind of counseling, and hopefully the whole process doesn't, further isolate, stigmatize this person to where they become more prone to act out in some, a violent and permanent way against helpless children. I mean, God, what else can you do, right? But like I said, the knee-jerk reaction is to, well, we need to take away guns. And certainly people like that, I mean, we should do everything we can to keep guns out of their hands. But eventually that teenager is going to start driving, and it's just, but for some reason, vehicle attacks like that aren't a cultural, thing here, in that way right now. That could change, right? I mean, you get the sufficiently high profile incident and name recognition and this kind of media glamorization and mystique, and there are some alt media companies which now have policies, strictly controlling whether or not the people even get named, identified, and made famous. And I think there is actually an element to the psychology of these events that gets encouraged by the kind of Columbineization of the perpetrators, which is just really, really incredibly counterproductive, to the point where, that's something where, I mean, just today, another one of my coworkers got assigned to go hang out at a middle school because some sort of copycat threat was made following, this incident in Texas, and it's not the only one. They'll crop up all over the place for some time because it's in the consciousness now in a really visceral way, which is just frightening and depressing. And it seems like you tend to get a slew of these right in a row when a big one like that pops off, which God help us, I guess. But I guess that's all I've really got on that. I don't know, what would you do? What can be done? And I don't know, drop a comment below. If you enjoyed the content, feel free to share. Get other people engaged in the conversation. Realize it's been a while. Thanks for staying plugged in. If you're still watching, it's been fun, inspiring, and uplifting as always. We'll see you on the next one.